Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning in. We sure do appreciate it. We have back on the line the one and only Peter Schiff, the founder and CEO of Euro Pacific Capital and Schiff Gold. Peter, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Well, it's a thrill to have you back. I think our last one, Brace for Impact, has more than 100,000 views. And let's talk a little bit about QE. I guess all's well. The Fed has ended QE, which our buddy Andy Hoffman predicted they couldn't end QE. You've been saying that. It's impossible to stop QE, and they claim they did it. So what's going on?
Anybody can claim anything. And remember, they claim they ended QE too. They claim they ended the original QE program. So every time they're ending QE, they're starting up another one. So I don't see how it's going to be any different this time around. I think QE3 has done more damage to the economy than QE2. And so if they don't follow it up with QE4, we're going to be in a horrible recession and another financial crisis. And by the way, they haven't actually stopped QE. They're still doing it. They're just not doing as much of it as they were. And even when the program officially ends, they're still doing it because they're committing, even after they officially end QE, to reinvest all of the interest that they earn on their current portfolio, in addition to rolling over any maturing principal. So the Federal Reserve is still going to be a big buyer in the U.S. Treasury market and in the mortgage market, even after it officially ends QE3. And of course, I don't think it's going to be long before they relaunch QE4.
Well, I think you're probably right. I think that anything the Federal Reserve says or has said needs to be taken with a great big giant grain of salt. Of course, now we have Alan Greenspan publicly touting the value of gold and saying that, of course, central banks ought to be holding it, as should citizens. I want to ask you about that specifically, but I also want to ask you about this gold repatriation stunner. Zero Hedge is reporting the Dutch central bank secretly withdrew 122 tons of gold from the New York Fed. Boy, it wasn't that long ago, Peter, that we heard that Germany was having real difficulty getting its gold and still hasn't gotten it. But apparently the Dutch have gotten theirs. Had you heard that news?
Yeah, I read that story. And again, I don't know how the Dutch were able to succeed where the Germans failed. So I think we need some more proof that actually, in fact, happened. Although I don't think that is the reason that gold is up today. I think gold is rising, I think, on the back of both a rate cut in China and more promises by Draghi to create more inflation fast in Europe. And the one thing central bankers can deliver is on their promises to create inflation. They can't do anything else. They certainly can't grow the economy or create good jobs, but they can raise everybody's cost of living and undermine everybody's standard of living. And that's what they're doing. But it looks like we're going to have two back-to-back up weeks in gold and gold stocks. We'll see if that trend can continue. But to the extent that foreign central banks are buying more gold, that's only going to add fuel to the fire. Look at what Putin is doing. A lot of people thought that Russia was selling gold to defend the ruble. Instead, they were buying even more gold.
Right.
And I think the smart central bankers are doing just that. They are preparing to win the currency wars by buying as much gold as they can.
Yeah, I think so. And I want to ask you about inflation because, of course, you say that the central banks can only give you inflation. That's the only promise they can deliver on, and they want to, which is really offensive to humanity, frankly, because I don't understand personally how deflation isn't the better deal for those of us who have not had cost of living increases exceeding 1% a year for so long. I mean, we're being eaten alive by inflation. So let's talk about that. But before I forget the idea of Greenspan, what do you make of him now publicly, even at the CFR, the Rockefeller-founded CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, talking about the merits of gold, whereas Bernanke will call it a tradition, he's calling it money.
Yeah, it's kind of like maybe he's getting older and he wants to confess some of his sins, before he meets his maker. And, but he ought to know how hot this fire is going to get because he lit it. And, the one thing about Greenspan, and I always said that, is I believed he was a liar. I knew that he didn't believe the things that he was saying. He was just doing it anyway. And now he's basically proving that by saying, yes, this QE didn't work, it doesn't work. But Ben Bernanke and Janet Yellen are just following the playbook that Alan Greenspan wrote. And now he admits that, the playbook is no good and that you should buy gold. And this is the first time that you should actually listen to Alan Greenspan, and buy gold. And one thing I disagree with, he said gold was currency, and he said it had no equal, that it was better than the dollar or the euro. It's not currency, it is money.
Right.
And dollars and euros are a poor substitute. They're not legitimate currency because legitimate currency is backed by real money. So when the dollar was redeemable with gold, the dollar was currency and gold was money. But now that dollars are redeemable in nothing, they're Federal Reserve IOU nothings, then you have the choice between owning a fiat currency or owning real gold. And I think right now, the only thing that's keeping gold from going ballistic is the false belief that the Fed is the lone holdout in this race to the bottom, that the Fed is out of the QE business and is going to be raising rates. And when people figure out that that is wrong, and when the people who are selling the yen and selling the euro because they're worried about a QE in Japan and Europe, and they're buying the dollar because they think we're not going to do QE, when they find out that we're going to do more QE than Japan and Europe combined, they'll realize they've jumped out of the frying pan into the fire, and they're going to do everything they can to get out. And the only safe haven left, the only safe haven standing in a monetary sense, is going to be gold.
Yeah, and you mentioned the fact that you knew that Alan Greenspan was a liar and that he couldn't possibly believe the things he was saying because you know well that he wrote Gold and Economic Freedom back in 1966. And before he became a Keynesian, I guess, madman, before he became a true believer in the Fed's money printing machine, which I guess we both agree he didn't ever truly believe. I mean, he wrote the damn book on gold, didn't he?
And, I think, like many people, there's an old saying from Lord Acton, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when you're the chairman of the Federal Reserve, you're the closest thing to having absolute power, maybe, as we come to. And he became absolutely corrupted by the power, and I think his own ego. He believed the headlines that he could keep this thing going. Kind of like Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff just thought he could keep the Ponzi scheme going forever. And maybe he thought he was invincible for a while. But the Fed is not going to be able to keep this Ponzi scheme going. And I think now that Alan Greenspan is no longer the maestro conducting this orchestra, he can sit on the sidelines and be a little bit more honest about it. But, Ron Paul always tells the story about an encounter he had with the chairman where he actually confronted Alan Greenspan with the article he wrote, Gold and Economic Freedom. And he said, do you want to change any of this? Do you want to, amend it or footnote it now? And Alan Greenspan said, nope, I wouldn't change a word. Meaning that he still believed everything he wrote. See, most people thought, well, he had repudiated that was just, what he believed when he was young and immature. And now that he's grown up, the errors of his youth, have been overcome, right? But Greenspan has said, no, I stand by every word. So he's believed it the whole time. He's just now speaking more frankly about it because I think maybe the end is approaching, and he wants to distance himself to the extent possible from the calamity that he must know we're headed for.
Well, it's so interesting because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking of the internet bubble that I lived through in 99, 2000, and it seems to me that the best quote to just, I guess, shock us all back into reality is this idea that those who don't understand history are condemned to repeat it. The point is that you're constantly a guest on the mainstream Mockingbird financial news media like CNBC, and you're constantly speaking truth, but you're constantly encountering combative responses to what you've been saying because people will come on and say, well, Peter, you've been wrong. You've been wrong. You've been wrong. Look at the stock market. Look at inflation is low. They will tout these mockingbird ridiculous points that those of us who know the history of the Fed and those of us who know the truth know that they are nothing more than mockingbirds. What my point is that the internet bubble that we saw in 2000, they kept talking about the new paradigm. Well, it's not a new paradigm. And the new paradigms always collapse. And so this fiat money, this fiat dollar paradigm, this debt-based paradigm, this 40-year-old, 45-year-old currency now, this petrodollar, is going to die just like all fiat currencies die, and what will survive is this barbarous relic, this gold, this money, real money. And I think the world is starting to see that.
Yeah, well, some people are trying to see it, but the masses still don't see it. Certainly the big money speculators don't see it yet. That's why they short every gold rally. but they're also going to get burned. And I'm not going to shed any tears for these guys who get wiped out short gold and silver, nor am I, going to shed tears for a lot of other people who have been consistently wrong. I know that the people who understand what's going on and who are taking advantage of other people's ignorance or stupidity and who are buying gold will be rewarded. And fortunately, they'll be among the people who are in a position to help put the country back on the right track, because they won't be broke like everybody else, and they'll have resources to help maybe sway public opinion and invest in the businesses that will grow the economy. But, it's the same old with respect to me. I did an interview with this reporter. It was a headline on Market Watch the other day. The New York Post picked it up. The guy that predicted the last crash says the Fed is responsible for the next one. But, the whole story, and she misquotes me a few times. And the thing is, reporters misquote you, and then even when you tell them they misquoted you, they refuse to change it, because they're generally misquoting you for a reason, because they're trying to discredit you. And so they want to pretend you said something that you didn't, so that they can discredit what you didn't say.
I agree with
instead
that.
of what you actually say. But the premise of the article is, hey, Peter Schiff did a great job of calling the housing bubble and the financial crisis, but the predictions he's made since have been bad. And so the basic thing is, well, maybe he just got lucky back then. And they point to how I've been calling for a weak dollar, yet the dollar's been rising, as if A, that's the only prediction I've made since the financial crisis, or B, as if I only started recommending or saying the dollar would rise after the financial crisis. But if you go back in time, the dollar is still lower today, not only in terms of other fiat currencies, but certainly against gold, than when I first began forecasting that it would decline. So the dollar decline is still happening. We just haven't had a complete collapse yet. But if you look at all the predictions I've made since the 2008 financial crisis, and I've made numerous predictions, and people that listen to my radio show, that read my articles, or things I did on YouTube, know how many predictions I've made that have already come true. I would challenge any mainstream economist to put up more accurate forecasts than the ones I've made. Now, has everything I said happened? No. Right, the big forecast of a dollar crisis, gold 5,000, a bond bubble bursting, those haven't happened yet. But those are the end game. I mean, by the time those predictions comes true, it's too late to do anything about it. It's too late to protect yourself, because that ship will have long sailed. I'm trying to warn people in advance. And what this Market Watch reporter didn't point out is the critics that she is quoting in her article now, who are saying, oh, what Peter Schiff is saying is impossible, it can't happen. That's what they were saying before. I was forecasting and warning about the housing bubble and the financial crisis for years before the bubble burst. And the whole time people were saying, oh, who cares what Schiff says? He's been saying this for years and nothing has happened, and so he doesn't know what he's talking about. So they're saying the same thing now. And they're trying to claim that, well, I'm just this broken clock, and every once in a while I get it right. I'm not a broken clock. I'm just consistently accurate. And a lot of times I forecast stuff in advance, and because it takes a while to happen, the people who don't understand it think I'm wrong, or they think I'm lucky. Well, they do that at their own peril. If they want to survive and thrive in this environment, then they need to listen to what I say and stop listening to the critics who have always got it wrong.
Well, the other thing that they do, and I completely agree with you, that these reporters, quote-unquote reporters for Mockingbird mainstream media, of course, Operation Mockingbird was rolled out by the CIA. They wanted to make the point that they could get any story that they chose on the front page of all of the papers in the United States.
In this particular article, the one thing, I told her that the dollar could fall as much as 90% if the Fed doesn't change course. Mm-hmm. And so she reports that, as Peter Schiff says, the dollar is going to fall by 90%. I don't know if it's going to fall by that much. I did tell her that I thought it would fall by at least 50%. But there's a big difference between a 50% decline and a 90% decline. I mean, they're both huge. And if the dollar does decline 50%, that's a massive prediction that I would have gotten right. But somehow it has to fall 90% now for me to be right. But I think the reason that she latched on to the 90% figure, that's the figure that she had people comment on to say, oh, that's crazy, that's not going to happen. And again, if the dollar does go down by 90%, it's not going to go down by 90% against the euro. I'm talking about real purchasing power, 90% decline in terms of gold. Mm-hmm. Because chances are, if the dollar loses 90% of its value versus gold, a lot of other central banks are going to be, racing to the bottom as well. I think the dollar is going to win the race. But if we have a decline in the dollar of that magnitude, it's not going to be measured against the euro or the yen. It's going to be measured against gold or silver, or something that central banks can't also debase.
That's right. And I just want to flesh out my point about the mockingbirds, because what they won't do is they won't tell people the full truth. So they'll report about gold, but they won't tell you that the central banks working in tandem are throwing, literally now hundreds of millions of paper ounces of gold into the market, at inopportune times in the middle of the night. They won't tell you about the manipulation of the precious metals of gold or silver, but they'll talk to you about the fact that gold and silver are both down on the year. My point is that they only give you half the story, and that's why they're mockingbirds. They're serving a different agenda. So I empathize with you, Peter, because you've taken the brunt of their crap for an awful long time, but we all know that they're a bunch of liars, and that's why CNN's viewership is at a 20-year low. And do you realize that CNN is no longer going to be on Dish Network? The CEO of Dish Network said goodbye to CNN, basically calling them has-beens.
Yeah, they talk about gold being down on the year. Do you know how much gold is actually down this year in percentage terms?
Are we down, 4%?
Not even. It's not even down 1%. As I talk, it's down about 0.3%. So, and I think that gold is going to finish the year positive, right? For all the negativity, all the naysayers, I mean, if there's one thing that people seem to be unanimously agreeing on, is the idea that gold is going to crash. That gold was a bubble, it's popped, and it's got no place to go but down. You have overwhelming consensus about it. Yet gold's not going down. It's not soaring to make new highs, but given all of the sentiment against it, the weight of the selling and the short selling, why is gold not going down? Why is gold back above 1,200, right? If everything is working against gold, right, and everybody believes that all the fundamentals and all the technicals have lined up against gold so that it's the perfect storm of collapse, why is it above 1,200 again? Why won't it go down? And that's because it's not going to go down. It's going to go way up. That's the thing. And when the shorts are forced to reverse their positions, there is no physical supply available for them to buy, especially when the speculators really want in. When all of the hedge funds that were piling into the GLDs and these ETFs back in 2010 and 2011, when they want to reestablish their long positions, where are the ETFs going to get the gold? Who's going to sell it to them? So I think gold's going to go up even quicker than it's going to come down. There's an old saying in the markets. Markets take the stairs up and the escalator down. Mm-hmm. Well, I think in the case of gold, it took the escalator down, but it's going to take a rocket ship up.
Well, I want to ask you about the Swiss gold referendum, but before I do that, let's just talk about the insidious nature of inflation versus deflation, because I think that the Federal Reserve's stated goal of inspiring inflation, they want the dollar, they want to see inflation, and I think their target rate is, 3%? Explain to us why they want inflation as opposed to deflation. Isn't deflation better for us, the consumers, those of us who haven't had big, giant pay raises for the last 10 years?
Well, of course. First of all, let's talk about prices, because that's generally what the bankers are trying to pretend that they're referring to. So is it better to have prices rising for consumer goods, or is it better to have prices falling for consumer goods? And the answer is obvious, right? None of us have an unlimited amount of money. And so the lower the prices are, the more stuff we can buy. In fact, for a lot of people, the only way they can afford something is if the price comes down. And if the price goes up, in many cases, people have to do without things. Look at what's happening in Russia. Because the ruble is so weak, Russia is having an inflation problem. Prices are rising officially 7-8%. And I'm reading reports that the consumers have stopped spending, that the stores are empty, Russians are staying home because they can't afford to buy things anymore. But the politicians are trying to convince us that it's the fear of dropping prices that stops consumers from spending, and that if prices go up, they'll rush to the store to buy. And that's pure nonsense. Economics has few laws, but one of them is the law of supply and demand. And it's a law, like the law of gravity. And that law states that demand is a function of price. The higher the price, the lower the demand, the lower the price, the greater the demand. But what economists are trying to tell us when they say inflation is going to cause consumers to spend, they're arguing that demand goes up as price goes up. That's like arguing that if I drop a rock out of my hand, it's going to float upwards towards the sky, right? No, right? Law of gravity says it's going down to the earth, not up to the heavens. Well, consumers respond to lower prices by buying. Why does everybody have a cell phone today, yet so few people own them in the 1980s when Gordon Gekko had a cell phone in Wall Street? Because when Gordon Gekko bought a cell phone, they were about $2,000, $3,000 a piece, and it was almost as expensive to make calls. The reason that everybody bought them is the price kept going down. And as prices went down, more people were able to buy. So your standard of living goes up when your cost of living goes down. Free markets create abundance. You produce more stuff and you find less expensive ways of producing it. Therefore, more people can enjoy the benefits of more consumption, and you have a rising standard of living. So given all of the benefits of falling prices that are obvious and historically proven, look back towards the United States, look at periods where prices were falling, especially for extended periods of time, and it happens when the standard of living is growing much faster than it is today. So given all of the evidence, the overwhelming evidence that a falling price level is better than a rising price level, why are politicians promising more inflation and panicking if we don't have enough inflation? And again, they keep talking about the threat of prices going down. But in most of these economies, in fact, all these economies, Japan, Europe, prices are not going down. They're still rising. They're just claiming they're not rising fast enough. And why do they want faster inflation? It's not to grow the economy or to help the average man. Higher inflation will compound the misery that the average people are already suffering thanks to the policies of the Fed. Right. No, the real reasons they want inflation are twofold. One, they want to continue to blow air into financial bubbles. They know that without more inflation, stock markets could come down, real estate markets could come down, banks could fail, so they need that. And more importantly, they want to wipe out debt. They want to wipe out the debt of overly leveraged corporations and individuals that have borrowed money to buy houses, to buy cars, to go to college, to purchase stuff on credit, right? But particularly, they want to wipe out the debt of the governments, European governments, Japanese governments, American governments. Politicians the world over have promised the moon to voters to win their votes. And to get elected, they make promises that the taxpayers can't keep. And nobody wants to admit that they can't fulfill these promises, that they can't repay their debts. And so what are they going to do? They have two options. They can default, which is political suicide, because then you have to come clean and admit that you lied, or they can inflate. Default is better economically, but inflation is better politically because it provides cover to the politicians. And that's exactly what they're doing. They want to create inflation to wipe out their debt because they don't have the integrity to default honestly, so they do it surreptitiously through inflation.
All right, well, just a couple more questions for you then, because we see the Swiss probably recognizing exactly what you're talking about and wanting to make the move to have their central bank, the Swiss central bank, reback their currency with 20%, 21% in physical gold. What do you make of the Swiss referendum? Do you think it's as big a sea change and as important an event as other pundits out there are claiming? Or do you think that no matter how that vote goes, the future's been cast in stone because of the BRICS, because of what China's doing, because of what Russia's doing? Does it really matter what happens with this Swiss gold referendum?
Well, I think the big picture, gold's going higher whether or not the Swiss pass this initiative. And there are plenty of people in Switzerland that will put themselves on a gold standard if they can't force the government on one. Mm-hmm. Swiss will buy gold. And in fact, that's basically what Mario Draghi said today by promising more inflation in Europe. Well, he's also promising more inflation in Switzerland. Now, if the Swiss don't want to suffer that loss of purchasing power, if they can't force the central bank to depeg from the euro, because that's what happened, right? The Swiss did not want to join the euro currency. They didn't want to give up the solid Swiss franc for an untested euro. And that was a good call, right? They didn't get on that ship, but now they want to tether their boat to it anyway by pegging the franc to the euro. And because they've done that, the Swiss have blown out their balance sheet. Their balance sheet is now over 70% of GDP. The Bank of Switzerland is sitting on 250,000 francs for every family in Switzerland. I mean, it is a disaster how much purchasing power has been diverted away from the Swiss to the Europeans to bail them out. And all of the Swiss quantitative easing is not about monetizing Swiss government debt. Switzerland is monetizing Italian debt, French debt, Spanish debt, Greek debt. Why are they doing that? Why are Swiss people having to underwrite the profligacy of other European countries? And it doesn't make any sense. And enough Swiss, a significant number, don't want it anymore. They want to rein in the insanity of their central bankers. And of course, you have an all-out, full-court press by the bankers and the politicians against this initiative, because they don't want the people taking back the power. They don't want to be restrained by the discipline of gold. But Switzerland was on a gold standard until 1999. They were the last country to officially abandon it. And until 1999, they had to keep a 40% gold backing. Well, the Swiss economy did great in the 70s and 80s and the 90s. And the Swiss citizens prospered during that period because they were on a gold standard. So to say that to go to a 20% gold standard would destroy the economy because it would take away the power of the central bankers to micromanage it is not only nonsense, but you want to take away the powers of the central bankers, because when they exercise that power, they destroy. The best thing you can do is rein them in and allow the free market to determine the exchange rate of the Swiss franc, not these bankers and politicians.
You know, Peter, you're such an inspiring guy. Before we let you go, if you don't mind, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the American dream. I've been thinking about starting a YouTube series for a long time, solely where I talk to special people like yourself and just talk about the American dream and how people can still make their dreams come true. Now, clearly, we're at the end of our call here, but let's just touch on it. Just inspire those who are listening to let them realize that the American dream is not dead, because I think a lot of people are suffering, a lot of people are unemployed, and a lot of people are losing hope. Is the American dream dead?
Well, first of all, to define it properly, it's not, home ownership or some stuff like some realtor made up, but the American dream really historically was the ability of any individual, no matter into what circumstances they are born, that they can rise to be anything they want, that from humble beginnings, you can become a captain of industry, you can become the president of the United States. It's not a function of class or who your parents is, but it's really about the individual and their own character and their own drive and determination and effort. And there's nothing that's going to limit them. In other societies, you always were limited. You couldn't go any higher than the class that you were born into. And that was the American dream. And certainly it's not dead. But for a lot of people, it's dormant, or it's in a coma, or some people maybe it's turned into a nightmare. But I do think that the dream can come true again, that we can live that dream, but only after we make significant changes. Now, for certain people, look, if you can start the right kind of company, you can become enormously wealthy, right? And there's, you come up with an app that a lot of people want to use, even if you can't make any money. But if you just get a lot of people to use your application and you convince a bunch of VCs to back you, and then you go public, the road to riches is very quick, and you could achieve hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in net worth and not actually make any profit. So from that perspective, it's never been easier to get super rich because so many people are so stupid. But there's not that many people who can do that. I mean, it's kind of like, a kid, in a typical, high school basketball team thinking he's going to be a player for the NBA. I mean, it's very, very hard. Very few high school players can make it to the NBA. So not very few entrepreneurs can cash out at $1 billion IPO. But what's actually happening, if you look at entrepreneurship in the United States, you look at small business ownership, it's really at record lows as far as the number of Americans, the percentage of Americans who are starting their own businesses. And why is it so difficult now to start a business in the United States? It's because of the regulation and the taxes and the lack of savings and opportunities for legitimate investments. As the Federal Reserve misdirects assets to financial speculation and all sorts of things, you have less investment available to fund legitimate, profit-making businesses that would lead to higher output and better paying jobs. And also, we've got so many young people now who have been led astray by the Pied Pipers of education. So many of our young people have been fooled into spending years in college and pursuing advanced degrees and borrowing incredible amounts of money. And now they graduate with a worthless degree. They're under a pile of debt, and there's few opportunities for them because while they were encouraging them to go to college to get a job, they were destroying the economy so that businesses couldn't create the jobs that they were supposedly studying to get. Meanwhile, they majored in things that had no relation to the jobs anyway, thanks to government education and grants and all this. And so it is much more difficult today to succeed. The wealthiest self-made Americans, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, these guys started from nothing. They didn't even go to college. They didn't even go to high school. You're talking about dropouts from elementary school that took menial jobs. That would be minimum wage type jobs today, although there was no minimum wage. So who knows? Maybe if there was a minimum wage, none of those guys would have become billionaires, in today's money. But those guys rose from nothing to riches beyond what we have today. In fact, those guys that I just mentioned, adjusted for inflation, were richer than Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, right? And by the way, Bill Gates didn't go to college either. He started, but he didn't graduate. Warren Buffett went. But I'm sure, he could have achieved his wealth without having gone to college, just like a lot of other people did. But it was much easier for people to succeed 100 years ago in America than it is today. And why is that? Because we were freer 100 years ago than we are today, because we didn't have all these government-imposed obstacles standing between us and success.
That's right. Well, I agree with you, and I think that the bottom line here is that the American dream is not dead, but it's being strangled by the Federal Reserve and immoral monetary policy. And we've got to throw this beast off our backs. It's imperative, as Ron Paul has said. It's imperative. Government does not give us freedom.
No, we're born, right? We're born free.
That's right.
The government takes away our freedom. The reason America succeeded for so long is because we kept our government enchained by the Constitution, right? They weren't allowed to take away our freedoms, right? But they have, because the Constitution no longer really enchains the government, because the courts don't apply it anymore. So the government is free to destroy our liberties, and it does so. But one thing I do want to say that we can do is protect ourselves, right? You can financially, you can protect yourself, right? You can make sure to do the right thing. That's what I'm trying to do with all of my clients at Euro Pacific Capital, Euro Pacific Precious Metals. Protect them, right? Get them off this Titanic, financial Titanic, into a lifeboat that I believe is seaworthy. Meaning, you get out of the dollar, right? You get out of your U.S.-based investments. You look at other currencies. Look at buying assets in countries that aren't on this kamikaze course. Yes, they may be printing too much money for now, but the rest of their economies are solid. They have lower regulation. They have lower taxes. They have more economic freedom. There are countries around the world that, they're not as great as America used to be, but they're much better than America is now. They're much closer to what we used to be than we are. And you can invest in companies there that are really growing their earnings, that are paying good dividends, and you can build a defensive portfolio of dividend-paying foreign stocks, precious metals. If you're working with me at Euro Pacific Capital or Schiff Gold, and at least if we do this, we may not be able to prevent the disaster from happening, but we can do something in the aftermath about cleaning up the mess. Because all the people who are conned and all the believers in big government and Keynesianism, they're going broke. Right? And so the people who understand free markets, understand Austrian economics, the role of gold, we're going to survive financially, we're going to thrive financially, and we're going to be in a much better position to effect change, to alter the course that we're on, both by using our resources to steer the political narrative in our direction, and by using our resources to invest in the businesses of the future.
Yeah, that's right. And as we let you go, as we've been saying for a long time, Peter, you can reclaim your own personal monetary sovereignty by purchasing physical silver and physical gold and holding it in your possession so that you're not left with just broken paper promises. One question for you here as we let you go. Euro Pacific Precious Metals, have you changed the name to Schiff Gold?
Yeah, they did change the name, and the reason for that was to try to create its kind of own brand, its own image, just not, part of my brokerage firm.
Sure.
But to kind of create its own identity and to kind of tie gold with my name that is maybe better known in the gold community than just Euro Pacific. Yeah. That might have been a little confusing. And so, when I first started the company, it was mainly to provide my brokerage clients with a credible, reliable way to buy physical gold for delivery, which we weren't doing. And I was just sending my brokerage clients, I just say, look, there's plenty of gold dealers out there, just find one. And a lot of them were getting ripped off. They were getting steered into overpriced numismatics. And so I wanted to know that there was a brokerage gold company that I could refer people to with confidence. And so I just started my own. Because I guess the minute I refer somebody someplace, I'm now liable for it. So I didn't want to tell somebody, go to this firm or go to that firm, because I didn't want to be responsible if something went wrong. So I just said, look, find a firm. But some people found the wrong firm. So when I started my own company, I now had a place that I can reliably tell my clients to go where I knew they wouldn't get ripped off, right? Because I was in control of what they were being sold. But now, my company has really been growing, my gold company, and we've gained a lot of market share. We're becoming a much bigger factor in the gold market, and so it's an idea just to kind of, let it stand on its own, not kind of as some kind of quasi-division of my brokerage firm, but an entirely separate business dedicated to, gold and silver, and in particular providing our clients with some of the most competitive, the lowest prices they can find anywhere on the internet for the bullion products, the coins and bars that we're selling. And no bait and switch, no high pressure sales tactics, just quality service at a low price.
Yeah, and I just want to say one last thing here. We talked about the American dream. I think one of the biggest, most important things that folks can remember as they think about their own dreams and pursuing their dreams is have a motor. That's sort of a term that was coined by Adam Carolla. He's got one of the #1 podcasts on planet Earth, I think the most downloaded podcast. He talks about having a motor all the time. He's got multiple jobs and multiple companies. Peter, you do. My friends over at Silver Doctors, they both have full-time jobs. They launched silverdoctors.com, and they've got SD Bullion. And, I've got a full-time job and a career, and I've got SGT Report and the Liberty Mill on the side as passions. Have a motor. Have a motor. There's 24 hours in a day. You need not only spend 8 of them working. Maybe you got to spend 8 working a job you don't love. Spend another 4, 6, or 8 working at a job you do love. Even if it doesn't pay a lot in the beginning, you'll get somewhere. That's a promise. Hey, our guest has been Peter Schiff, one of the nicest men I know, because, boy, Peter, there's nothing in this for you to come on and spend 45 minutes with me, but I guess you just care about...
That's not entirely true. I don't mind being complimented, but look, certainly it's possible that somebody who is listening to this program, right, they may buy one of my books. I'll make a little money there. More importantly, they may buy some gold from me. I'll make some money. They may become a client of my brokerage firm. So there is something in it for me. I'm not going to come out here and pretend that it's all, altruism, that I'm just doing it for the love of country and for the good of humanity. I'm doing it for those reasons too. But I also realize that I could benefit from what I have to say to the extent that people take action as a result of what I'm saying, and they use one of my companies to do it. So, it's not purely out of the goodness of my heart that I talk. So, but sometimes I do. I do talk at universities and I do speak places where I don't believe I'm going to get a lot of business, but I do it anyway because I think it's important to shape young minds. But on something like your show, and it goes on the internet, you mentioned our last interview, you had 100,000 listeners. I hope some of those listeners are now clients of mine. I really do. and I hope some of the people that listen to this interview will also become clients of mine, and we'll all make money together.
Well, that's cool. Hey, I'm just flattered that you're willing to take time to come on with me. That's the bottom line. That's just my own personal deal. I'm real flattered that you're willing to take the time. So why don't you tell people how they can get involved at Euro-Pacific? They just go to europacificcapital.com?
Well, actually, it's europac.net, EUROPAC.net. That's the website for the broker-dealer where we can have a brokerage account, we can have a managed account. I also have a family of mutual funds that people can learn about and get prospectuses on, either through me or you can get them at other firms, Schwab, Fidelity, all sorts of companies allow you to purchase my mutual funds. For gold, it's schiffgold.com, so that's easy to remember, just my last name, gold.com. If anybody is in Canada and they're listening to this, they can go to Europac Canada, which is a separate broker-dealer that I have up in Canada for our friends to the north. And if you're not an American and you're living outside the United States, europacbank.com, EUROPAC bank.com. That's my offshore bank. Fantastic banking and brokerage services offered, including my famous gold and silver-backed debit cards, which are a great product. I wish I could offer it to Americans, but unfortunately, I can't. I'm only offering it to non-Americans, and I would encourage people, follow me on Twitter and follow me at Peter Schiff, or go to my Facebook page and like me, or sign up for my YouTube channel. I put up a lot of good videos, and I used to do a daily radio show. I stopped doing that, but now I have a podcast, and I'm putting out new editions many times a week. I'm going to record another one today that'll be up there, and you can get my podcast at schiffradio.com. You can go there to listen to it, or you can also listen to it on my YouTube channel. You can go to iTunes and sign up to get all my podcasts automatically as they are uploaded.
Well, guys, our guest has been Peter Schiff, a man with a motor. Hey, Peter, thanks so much for taking the time to spend with us today.
Again, thanks for having me on.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. Guys, I just want to take a minute to thank you for joining us. Thanks for supporting all our efforts over at sgtreport.com and at thelibertymill.com. Have a great one. Bye-bye.